Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. So then the only slides that we have to share are the chair slides. All right. Well, it's on time. I want to start. Well, I'll start with sharing the slides. Once I share the slides, I can't see the Meet Echo thing. So I'm going to start with a poll. We have about 36. Yeah, we have 35 people, participants. And so you'll notice just below in the upper left-hand corner, there's a show of hands. And so I'm going to just take a straw poll, and and so the question is, we want to know is, are you familiar with the IETF process, the way it works? If you are, raise your hand. If you're not, don't respond or do not raise your hand. And depending on the number of no votes we get, that'll indicate how much, as we're going through this meeting, I should explain how we do things and what it is. So MNOT and other people said 50%, and so far it's currently running about that. We'll wait another 10 seconds and see, which means to me that as we talk about the things, use the raise your hand tool while I'm explaining something if something's not clear. We don't want to turn this all into a process discussion. We want to be able to get into the technical merits, but I think it's important that people know how to participate in the IETF, in an IETF working group, if they haven't already learned, because outside of the work that's happening here, there'll also be a lot of stuff on mailing lists and perhaps GitHub and so on. All right, so there's the vote people can see. Well, 2/3 are familiar. So I'll do abbreviated intros, and feel free to mention something. You can't do it in the chat because I won't see it easily, but offline, or after I'm done, or just raise your hand and we can, start talking. So with that, I'll share my screen and let us do the chair slides. So welcome to the first meeting of the HTTP-API working group. Working groups where most of the IETF work product gets done. It gets done in face-to-face meetings like this, which are generally for catching up and explaining what's happened since the previous meetings. Since there hasn't been a previous meeting, this will be a kickoff. Every working group in the IETF is organized into an area. Each area is run by 2 or more area directors, basically. Barry Liba, who you'll see in the participation, is our area director. He is the person who we will turn to, who we as chairs will turn to if we have, process questions or something like that. Okay. Next page. The note well. Everything in the IETF is done under a particular set of intellectual property rights. They're documented in what's called a BCP document. A BCP is a number that doesn't change even if, it's a level of indirection, right? Typical computer science solution. There are a couple of BCPs that describe the standards process, how working groups work. We have anti-harassment and code of conduct processes. Don't be a jerk. If you are a jerk, there are options available to us. There's dispute resolution and so on. If you disagree with what the chairs are doing, you can speak to Barry. If you disagree with what he's doing, there's escalation processes. Two of the important intellectual property processes are about copyright. When you present a document for the working group to adopt, which means the working group takes the ownership of it, that is transferring the copyright of that document to the IETF. patents and participation. If you participate in a working group, and that means you say something, pretty much, you agree that if you are aware of patents that affect the things that the working group is working on, that you will inform the working group, or you'll inform the IETF that you're aware of patents. The idea being that you can't sit there and help develop a standard and then the patent gets, disclosed after the thing's been adopted and published. The way we control that is through what we use the term blue sheets. When we meet in face-to-face, we hand around blue colored sheets of paper, everybody signs them, and that shows who attended the meetings, and it acknowledges that you agree, that you've read, you understand, and you agree to abide by the note well. The note well, for the virtual meetings, when you signed in to join the MeetEcho participation, then that's your signature. It's an electronic signature. Okay. This meeting is being recorded. It will show up on YouTube shortly after the meeting is finished in the IETF channel. Shortly after depends, of course, on time zone differences and so on. Administrative tasks, typically called administrivia. Blue sheets happen, as I said, automatically. We need some volunteers, note takers. That's being handled in the CodeMD. It's an Etherpad. We used to actually use Etherpad, now we use CodeMD. Do I have anyone who will volunteer to take minutes? We can't proceed past this step until we get to this step.
Take some minutes. It's Bron Gondwana.
Yes, I recognize your voice, Bron. Thank you very much. Hopefully there will not be a lot. The template for the minutes as you go to the Code is already in there, and minimum we just want to record action items and decisions taken by the group. Of course, as you know that, again, telling the third of the people who haven't been here before. Other people can log into the CodeMD session and feel free to make comments and corrections and additions. Jabber Scribe, the Jabber is a messaging protocol, IM protocol. It's already gatewayed into the MeetEcho visual display. Somebody who is following along, what they need to do is if somebody says Mike, M-I-C, at the start of what they say, that means we'd like you to, they're asking you as the Jabber Scribe to verbally relay that into the meeting. If you're the Jabber Scribe, you automatically get to jump ahead of the queue when you are relaying people who aren't putting themselves in the queue to speak. So is there someone willing to be a Jabber Scribe? It has, so far all this week, it's been pretty zero effort, or close to zero.
I can do that for you.
Okay, and that was, I didn't catch the voice. Who volunteered?
Mark, hi.
Oh, hey, okay, hey, thanks, Mark. Getting off easy. All right, the agenda. So we have the administrative stuff. Agenda bashing is where we look through the agenda and say, are there things we're missing? Are there things we want to add? I'm not expecting any major changes, but does anyone have any suggestions as to what, any changes they want to make? Unmute yourself and speak up now.
Hey, it might be good to have a little discussion about, to set expectations about how drafts get adopted in the working group and what process we're going to go through for that, and how that gets tracked.
Yeah, I was going to cover that in some of the I didn't put agenda items in for discussing processes and so on because it wasn't clear to me how much we needed to do that. But yeah, that's a good point. Okay. So,
and I say that this group is a little bit unusual in that the charter doesn't contain milestones of deliver this draft, deliver that draft, deliver that draft. It's like the HTTP working group where the group, goes and, or at least the charter is set up so that the group goes and decides what it adopts and checks with the AD and then does it. So that might be a little unusual for some folks.
Sure. Okay. Actually, I'm going to tee that. All right. Before we'll get back to that almost immediately. But are there any other agenda addition suggestions? All right. I'm going to give a 2-sentence introduction about Mark's relevance to this working group, and then I'll let him explain what the process is like. Every working group has what's called a charter. The charter describes what the group is to work on. It can also describe what the working group is not going to work on and say this is out of scope. Charters evolve over the course of the lifetime of a working group. And the way that's done is the working group says we want to amend the charter to discuss this new thing that we hadn't anticipated before. The working group agrees they want to make that change, and then that gets approved by the area director and the collection of area directors known as the IESG. Changes in charter are filtered out to the whole IETF through an IETF-wide mailing list named IETF at IETF.org, which anyone can join. And then the charter is approved. Typically in a charter, there are milestones attached that says, oh, by mid-2021, we will have determined an initial set of things to work on. By the end of 2021, we'll have first drafts, and by the end of mid-2022, we'll have sent the documents up to the ISG to review. Milestones are aspirational, and they also evolve over time, and they can be changed by the chairs in conjunction with their area directors. So Mark, you want to talk about some of the things that make this a little unique, both for the old-time IETFers and how they work for the newcomers here?
Sure. So when we proposed the charter for this group, part of the impetus was that while we did drafts like what we're talking about here once in a while in the HTTP working group, it wasn't, it was difficult to balance the different communities there. There's slightly different communities and specialities, and we felt like there might be some benefit to having a separate, distinguished community and working group to talk about HTTP APIs and try and push the ball forward on that. And so my hope is that this group is going to form a community. I won't say the community, but a community of people who are working on specifications that help, HTTP APIs become more interoperable and more functional for folks. And so when we chartered it, it was deliberately chartered in much the same way the HTTP working group is, where it's an open remit. The group can decide, well, we think that this is a good draft to work on, and so we're going to adopt it, and you do a call for adoption, and then you work on it and publish it as an RFC. There's, that's a fairly generous amount of leeway in the IETF. Most working groups are chartered with very specific deliverables and a very specific scope. And so I think it's good for us to have a discussion here about, how we will go about doing those adoptions. I mean, the formality we use in the HTTP working group is that we kind of get a sense of that a draft is a potential candidate. It's a candidate for adoption, and we have some preliminary discussions. And then if we think that it's a contender, we put out a more formal call for adoption where people say whether or not they support the adoption of that draft. And often we do count pretty strongly the intent of implementers. If we see lots of implementers saying, yes, I will implement that, or I intend to put resources into this, that's a really good sign. And it's a mechanism that we use to avoid, creating documents that don't get used. There's this concept that I often refer back to of hope-based standardization of, well, look, if we standardize something, it'll become important, it'll get a real RFC number, and the world will adopt it, everything will be good. And then that's just not how the real world works. Becoming a standard is the end of a process whereby something gets used widely, and then it needs to be built on top of, so we kind of even out the edges. And so I think I'd like to see some discussion of a process where we can make sure that we're actually working on things that are important and that'll actually, get implemented and move the needle in the industry, not just somebody's hobby horse project. Although, sometimes you do say, okay, let's take a punt and see if that thing works out. Because if it doesn't work out, it's not going to waste a lot of resources. It's not going to cause harm. But if it does work out, it's really good. That's a judgment call. And the working group needs to talk through all those different things. And I suspect we probably need to get some runs on the board first and get a working cadence going. And so it's great that we have a set of documents that people have already brought for discussion. So maybe we just need to start working on those. But in the back of our heads, I think we should be thinking about the next set of documents and processes to make sure we adopt the right ones and get them and set them up for success. So, in the HTTP working group, we've actually recently started using a dedicated GitHub repo where we just use the issues list to track the status of different documents that we might adopt in the future. And that's something we might want to consider here, because what's nice about that is you don't have to refer back to an email 3 months ago and figure out what the current state of something is. The state lives in that GitHub repo that everybody can see. And there are other things that I think we could talk about in terms of how to build a community here, how to make sure that this is including a good selection of the industry, but it's early days, so maybe we should just talk about the drafts now. Is that kind of what you're looking for, Rich?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was looking for. Thank you, Mark. Mark wrote the charter for the group and has, I'm sure almost everybody here knows Mark, a long history, has chaired, created HTTP working group, has co-chaired the Quick working group for years, and is, he's done a lot of work here and he understands the process. He's also previously involved with lots of other processes, and he has been at the forefront of pushing the IETF to adopt, these funky new technologies like GitHub.
I forgot to say one thing, sorry.
Yeah,
and that is the charter has a built-in doomsday clause that we need to prove ourselves that we're a functional and productive group within an amount of time, and if we don't do that, we don't get renewed. So I think that's that's a good motivator until it becomes a bad motivator. But something to keep in mind.
Right. Yes.
And Rich, can I speak something in?
Yeah, please. Oh, yeah, Barry, our area director, please speak up, Barry.
Yeah, hi, this is Barry Lee, but I wanted to add one thing to what Mark said about adopting documents, that for those that are not IETF regulars, in the IETF, when we accept a document, it's a starting point for development. And that doesn't mean that the contents of that document are what will be in the standard. It means that those are what the initial proposal to the working group is. And often there are significant changes. The entire document may change drastically through the process of developing the document. I just wanted to make sure that people understood that.
Yeah,
Thanks.
that's a really good point. Go.
Sorry.
No.
That reminds me of one other thing, which is that I think it's chartered in, if not, it's in the process, that when we adopt the document, we need to check with Barry as our area director to make sure that he's aware of what we're doing. We can't just go off and willy-nilly adopt things. I think it would benefit, putting my HTTP chair hat on, I think it would benefit us and the HTTP working group community if there's a good level of coordination on draft adoption between HTTP and HTTP API to make sure that there's awareness in both communities of what the other ones are doing. But I'm pretty sure we can do that at a chair level because we know each other. So Tommy, Daryl, if you don't know Tommy, I'm sure you'll get to know him pretty soon.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll send a mail to the list. We've just updated our contributing document in the HTTP working group, which talks about things like draft adoption now. And I might send a message to the list to see what people think about that as a starting point. I'm not saying that we should adopt it wholesale, but it's some text that we might find useful.
Yeah, please do that.
I'll put that in Jabber and send it to the list.
Okay, great. Okay. Any questions about what we've gone through so far? Just speak up. Great. Okay. One of the first things we should decide. Yeah, please go ahead. I'm sorry.
Excuse me, Rich. Can you please repeat the timeline you suggested at the beginning?
You mean how long the timeline for the agenda?
No, the timeline for the work group.
Oh, that was just, oh, you mean like the milestones?
Yeah.
I was just making those dates up in my head as I spoke. But the milestones are typically measured in units of months, and they are, let's say they're aspirational, they always get revised and pushed out. It always takes longer than you think, even if something is drop dead simple. So
Cool.
yeah, don't you know, a month or two to adopt some documents, 6 months to revise it. That's incredibly optimistic, but it's often what goes in a first draft. And the area director will be the one nagging the chairs to, you know, update and fill in milestones. And the chairs will then come to the working group and say, okay, how much longer do we need to do this? Our job as chairs is to keep the process flowing. I'm here because I know how the IETF works. Daryl is here because he knows how HTTP APIs work. And so between the two of us, we should be able to, you know, keep the working group flowing smoothly. And if not, then Barry or his successor as area director can replace us. But don't worry about that. Oh, one other last thing to lead into, because you'll hear the phrase. Everything, well, take it back. It depends on GitHub. We have many of the working groups have tools to use GitHub. It seems like, you know, we should be like a no-brainer and use it. There is a GitHub in my introductory note. I pointed to a document that described different models of how to use GitHub. I think I'd like to, let me just say, does anyone object to using GitHub as the primary source of where the working group stores its issues, documents, and so on before posting the official updates to the IETF site? Is there anyone who has concerns about using it? Okay. Want to make sure I leave enough time. Great. What we'll do is, with Mark's help, the chairs will set up a GitHub structure that has been used successfully. I encourage people to look at the Git working group document and see if they have questions or concerns and post them to the HTTP API list. But it has proven to be, you know, fairly smooth. As Mark said, one of the things we want to do is we want this to be a major community for working on these areas. And clearly, if you're doing HTTP APIs and you're not on GitHub, then you are a niche player. So we clearly want to be on GitHub. I'll end with the phrase, we'll confirm that on the mailing list. Depending on how much we decide to adopt GitHub, everything gets officially confirmed by posting a thing to the mailing list and say, does anybody agree with this decision that we made? Speak up, let's confirm the consensus, and then we'll just go ahead. So our plan is to use GitHub. Mark and I and Daryl will set up a proposed structure. Someone will post a note into the to the mailing list about how to do it. Okay. The fun part of the agenda is then considering, you know, drafts to consider adopting. We'll get into those right after this. Milestones look like this. We'll have to figure some out. GitHub use, we have an organization, IETF Working Group HTTP, repository for document, one repo for meeting materials. I like Mark's idea of one repo for future work. There's a set of tools. All of this is documented in, you know, the common, the Git tooling, the Git RFC. Martin has a set of scripts that use GitHub Actions to format the documents, check that the formatting works, publish them up to the data tracker, the IETF's workflow site. There's common labels people are used to seeing: editorial, resolved, to be fixed, open issue, and so on. Not surprisingly, the Quick Working Group and the HTTP Working Group have had extensive involvement with Martin and Mark, and there is very successful ways of using them. So, having gotten all the administrivia out of the way, any questions or comments or things people want to say? I'll stop sharing so I can look.
So I do have a process question. For those of us actually coming from the IETF, the mere existence of a working group, especially with a doomsday condition in its charter, is a strong incentive to generate standards. And the kind of mistakes we can do in IPsec-ME, for example, if we create a few useless APIs, it's a small industry that gets the damage. If we create a bunch of useless HTTP API standards, it's much bigger damage. So my question is, do we have any additional processes in mind to ensure that there is actually wide consensus before we adopt or before we standardize things?
That's a really good question. I'll defer to Barry for commenting on that. Or Mark.
Barry had
Or
to find the right tab. Yaron, can you just repeat the last bit of your question?
So my question is, we have a strong incentive to actually generate standards. Right. And since the industry in this case is so big, right, diverse, but just big, we have a large potential of doing damage. So my question is, do we have special processes in this group to ensure that we actually do have wide consensus?
Well, I think it's in any working group, the point is for to have the right participants in the room to decide what's important to work on, what isn't, what's useful and what isn't, and it's up to the working group chairs to decide whether we have a critical mass of interest and interest in implementation of what we produce to proceed with it. So that's what I'm expecting, and that's what I'll consider and discuss with the working group chairs when they say there's a document that somebody wants put forward. Mark, feel free to add to that.
I'd say that the risk of doing actual damage is fairly small. I think unless you're considering damage to the IETF's reputation, which frankly gets damaged in this fashion on a nearly daily basis. I personally, I think it still drives a large part of the challenge we face, in that we have a relatively short amount of time to make sure that this community is sufficiently representative of the industry's needs, that we can actually do work that moves the needle, that actually helps and doesn't get ignored. I personally will be objecting to adopting documents that I don't think can do that, that don't seem to get traction with practitioners and implementers, or at least don't seem like they could. And that'll just be my personal view. I would hope that a few other people do that too, and we can try and drive some quality here. But yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, the phrase is cut the line. Usually we, to stop the discussion here, we can have further discussion on the mailing list. We've already burned through almost half of our meeting time. And I know people are really more interested in the documents. So thanks all for putting up with all this beginning. Roberto, you want to ask to share, and let's try to, present the general topic, and we have half an hour for 5 documents. So that means you have like 4 or 5 minutes to talk on each one.
Hi, let's see if I can rejoin the screen queue.
Yeah, no, I should have.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Roberto.
Okay, nice to meet you. We are speaking about rate limit headers. The draft was written by me. I work for the Italian government, and from Alex Martinez from Red Hat. It's about communicating service status and standardizing headers. So we introduced rate limit fields. The goal is to communicate service limits so clients can stop before flooding servers. And the goal was to align already existing rate limit headers and stop headers proliferation. In my experience, between roughly 20,000 API implementers in Italy, I found at least 30 possible rate limit header values. And it doesn't work. Clients just ignore them because they don't know which header are returned, nor their semantic. And another goal was to express multiple rate limit policies. So who wants them? Eric Mark launched the pool, and it was positive. Now the specs have roughly 1 year. They are configurable in Red Hat Freescale, Kong, Envoy Proxy, Azure API Gateway. They are supported by Italy and the Netherlands. More other countries, European countries, which I'm in touch with, are going to implement these, just like the UK in some APIs. So those are some of the headers we want to replace. And on the right, the simple set of values. So just express those quota units for the total limit, the number of remaining units you have, and then the reset time of the quota in delta seconds, just like retry after. So we have the same semantic for both when you are in 429 and when you are rate limiting. So in this slide, seems complex, but just ignore the optional part on the left. It's actually a comment. You just have to process the mandatory part. But if you want, you can express all other multiple rate limiting policies with the number of seconds, the number of quota units, and the window. So in this case, we have 10 calls every 5 seconds, and I have one cap of 80 requests in 60 seconds. All this optional part should not be interpreted by the client. It's just to communicate a wider context of the rate limit. So it's optional. So technical choices. We just support delta seconds, just like retry after. This prevents issues with NTP skew and adjustment issues. Moreover, when you use timestamp, you need synchronization between clients and server. The quota is expressed in units. It may or may not be requests. We want to standardize the syntax, and we want to give implementers a bit of flexibility in implementing their quota. So you have flexible semantics to express dynamic policies, sliding windows and concurrency limits. That depends on which values you fill the fields. And we don't mention infrastructural concepts like connection, because a service can be built with a wider infrastructure. And it's thanks to the experience of Alex that works with the Red Hat API gateways and has a lot of experience in deploying large architectures with large API architectures. Open issue needing input. Well, after 1 year, we have some implementers. Well, we can change everything, but I think we should find a way to respect the actual ecosystem that exists, actually. So we can move, but we should move with a bit of sensibly. So refine normative language, respect to intermediaries, use of structured headers, whether we want to or not to define a throttling scope. There was a discussion even with Mark and Roy. Other issues that may not be worth investigating: define header dependencies and upper bound for rate limit reset. But well, we don't. Those are minor points. So, one question everybody asks us: are you inventing a new service management model? No, we just want to clean things up for all the organizations that use them. So we are not proposing something new. We want to just to reorganize something that exists for organizations that already use them. This is an existing use case. We want to standardize it, and we are not advocating this is the best way of throttling, rate limiting, connection, whatever. And why don't use timestamps? Because, well, I said before, timestamps require NTP on both sides, and NTP is hard in the real world, and well, and we like retry after. So, thanks. That's all. I hope I have been clear and quick, and I really hope that this draft will be adopted, because currently one of the limits to for the implementers is that, okay, it's cool, we would like to implement that, but we are waiting for it to be standardized.
Okay. There was a comment in the chat from Mark, who's in favor of adoption, but understand, proponents that the draft may change in ways that will break stuff that's already, could change in ways that will break deployment. If, since you're seeking that.
Well, I'm in the process of other drafts, so I know it can change, and I think we can do whatever. I mean, the work group is master. Okay. All I say is that I suggest doing that together with implementers, because it's more sensible than just doing something that won't get adopted because people is stuck with the previous implementation, unless there are clearly very good reasons.
Okay, great.
Mark,
Does anyone have it? Thanks, Daryl. Does anyone have any clarifying questions that would make their understanding of this more, improve their understanding? Again, what we want to do is make sure we understand the document so that we can decide, in the interest of time, probably most likely on the mailing list, should we adopt this as a work item? We're not gonna, there's lots of discussion in the chat about changes that could be made, should be made. And as someone pointed out, we'll make those after adoption. But are there any clarifying questions? Seeing that there seems to be a lot of positive interest in this, is there anyone who wishes to say now that they are opposed to adoption, or they're not ready to decide yet? Suggested we do a show of hands. Okay, we'll do that since that worked before. Raise your hand if you are opposed, or you're just not ready to decide. We're not making the decision here. Again, it will go to the mailing list anyway. So if you're opposed, please let us know. Nobody is raising their hand, many are not. So it seems we have strong consensus here among those who have an opinion to adopt this. We will take it to the mailing list and confirm that decision. Before it gets adopted, we'll have set up the GitHub repo and publish, how to transfer the repo over and things like that. So there's the results. Thank you. Okay, we have.
Thank you, everybody. I can
Thank you.
Close my.
Yep.
Well, thanks to Alex that is in mute now, but he made a great work for this on this draft.
Thank you. And, yes, and thank you very much for handling the time. Okay. Roberto? No, I'm sorry. Eric, can you request screen access?
Sure.
Okay, so you have 3 drafts you're presenting. We'll take a break after each one to see if there's any clarifying questions, to do a poll about interest in the working group.
Okay.
And we have a total of 18 minutes, so you get the same 6-minute quota.
Okay.
Go for it.
Thank you very much. Okay, thanks very much. So I'll be presenting 3 drafts for adoption in the HTTP building blocks or HTTP API building blocks working group. Very briefly about myself, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Erik Wilde. I've been working in companies that are selling API management software. So my input mostly comes from companies who are developing APIs and are looking for certain design patterns, so to speak, that they can use in APIs to make it easier to scale their API landscape.
I think we lost Eric.
You click on the little circular arrows in the bottom right-hand corner to reconnect your audio. Or reconnect completely.
His video froze as well.
Yeah.
I guess I can say Windows probably decided to reboot.
What time zone is he in? Was it a mandatory Mac update just to get the other side involved? Let's see chats. All right, well.
18 minutes was probably just too much for him. So I didn't need that much time.
Yeah, okay. He didn't have a backup presenter. So.
You can't hear me?
We can now.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know what happened. I'm really confused.
That's okay.
Sorry, my apologies. Okay, so when did it stop? Did you see the deprecation slide?
No. Can you reshare too?
No.
Yeah.
Oh my God. I am so sorry. Everything. Yeah, my internet is not doing well. Yes.
It stopped right at the, let's call it the tail end of your introductory slide about you.
Very good. So all the interesting stuff didn't work. Okay, now. Okay. Now, first draft API deprecation. Can you see that slide about that draft?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thanks. I'm nervous now. So that one was developed together with Sanjay Dalal. The motivation was to have something that allows you to announce that an API is going to be deprecated or it has been deprecated. in the same way as the sunset header allows you to say that an API is going to be shut down. So the idea was that it would be the same simple mechanism that allows you to just have a timestamp, and that timestamp either is in the future or in the past, and allows you to state the fact that an API is deprecated or will be deprecated. The model is really simple. It's just a simple timestamp. It's a simple HTTP header field. And the idea is that in APIs, that most likely will be something that maybe only the home resource will expose. But like with a sunset header field, that is actually up for the API designer to decide where this header field will be used and where API users can basically check for it. And the draft also defines a deprecation link relation, so that if you have additional information about deprecation, what are alternatives, when is the shutdown going to happen, all of this, you can link to additional resources. And that's the fundamental model behind it. The history, this draft, we started working on it in February 2019. We have published 4 versions in the meantime. I have put all the links here. All the slides are online. You can find them and follow the links. We have a section on implementation status, meaning that there are some existing implementations already. Some use the deprecation header field. Others use something similar, but they use a different concept because it's not yet a standard. But we do see some uptake, at least in the field, where API designers seem to think that this is something that's useful. So I think that's it for the deprecation header field. I really want to keep it short and sweet.
I just want to bring up one point. I believe the deprecation draft has reference to the sunset header, and the deprecation is marked as on standards track, but sunset is informational. Just as a matter, is that a problem? Lost him again. That is not a problem. Thank you, Martin.
All right. While waiting for Eric to reconnect, I'm sure he's about to.
Mark has a hand.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, there's Eric. He's back.
I have been asked about this draft from the API people at my employer, and they expressed desire for it. I've also heard from Sanjay, one of the authors, that he's talked to lots of folks about it. So I think there's definitely demand for this, and I think there's a certain amount of urgency around it. So I support adoption.
Yeah, we are already using it on the Microsoft Graph.
There you go. Okay.
Does anyone have concerns about it being adopted? Okay, we will move forward with a call to adopt on the mailing list. Yes, I see lots of support in the Jabber chat. Okay, we'll do it. At this point, it seems, I think people are bringing stuff up that they already know is of interest. So I first want to hear if there's people who have objections, Julian, as opposed to show of hands. It's in the interest of saving time, since we will be going back to the mailing list for all this stuff. All right, Eric, next draft.
Okay, next draft. The next draft is a little bit more complex, maybe. So that is something that I've been working on with Herbert van de Sampel. So here the idea is that there is the web linking draft that has been around for a long time, authored by Mark, updated in the meantime, and it has basically defined how web links work. It's something that is really fundamental to many things nowadays. What it doesn't allow you to do is represent links themselves as a resource. So we have had various scenarios where that would be interesting. One of those scenarios, for example, is that you have a large number of links that are associated with a resource, and you cannot or don't want to put all of these into a header field. So you want to serve the links as a separate resource. That's one scenario. Another scenario that we looked at is that you might have a resource being served from one location, and the links actually are served from a third party. saying, here are some links about that other resource. Again, you would need a resource that can represent a bunch of links. What we've done in that draft is we have taken the model defined by the web linking RFC. We basically just define a media type for it and say, okay, here's a media type, how you can use those links in a standalone resource. And the majority of the draft then also defines a JSON model for the same underlying web linking model, but it's a JSON syntax. And that is because we believe that probably a lot of people would prefer having JSON instead of having to parse the specific header syntax. There are some tricky parts around the context. So when do you use anchors and stuff? And I don't want to go into any details around this, but we've carefully worked these things out. At least that's what we believe. Here's a very simple example. So that would be a JSON version of two links, basically. Both links have an anchor, a link relation, and a target. And that's just a simple JSON representation for doing this kind of thing. About the history, this one actually, we have started developing that a long time ago in December 2016. We switched drafts in the middle somewhere, but in the meantime, we've gone up to 11 draft versions. We tweaked, the biggest change we did was actually tweaking the JSON model to be JSON LD friendly, because we had some input from communities that were saying that it would be nice if the JSON would work well with JSON LD. So we went through a whole redesign of JSON. That's where we are now. We do have some implementations. So we have implementations in library systems. We also probably have a very, very big upcoming implementation in the JS1 standard. They want to use the Linkset model as well. JS1 are product codes. So they have a lot of information about products, same kind of thing. You can represent that with links. And they have asked us that they would really like this to become a standard better sooner than later. We'll see how fast it goes. But that's the current status that we have there, that we do have some interested parties. We have some implementations, and we have a little bit of implementation experience as well.
We have a couple of
hands. Does it? Yeah, go for it, Daryl.
Mark, Phil?
I'll just jump in if I may. Hello, Phil Archer with GS1. Just to back up what Eric was just saying, GS1, for those who don't know, is the standards body behind the barcode. We have 1.5 million members around the world, including all the biggest retailers and manufacturers. We very strongly endorse this. We have a standard in public review at the moment, which has a big section that says the following text is informative only until Linkset becomes a standard, when all the text below becomes normative, right? We really, really want this to be an RFC. We've already implemented it. We have people like, every healthcare company in the world asking for this. So we are strongly endorsing it.
Okay. You should have heard what they were saying about you while you were gone, Eric. Any questions, clarifying comments?
Alexei has a hand raised.
Go for it, Daryl.
I just had a quick look at RFC 6690 that came out of the core working group, and I believe it already describes one of the formats in the draft, which is identical, but the media type is already registered. So I think checking that this is not duplicating existing work is a good thing. The JSON one is, I don't believe it's registered. It makes sense.
So the core model is close. It is not the same model. So they have tweaked the model for their needs. We looked at that when we started working on that, and we decided that the core model was not what we needed because they didn't take the real web linking model, but instead they tweaked it in some ways that they needed.
Can you elaborate? Is the format not the same? That's what you're saying.
The underlying model is not exactly the same. Actually, we looked at that a long time ago.
The underlying model doesn't matter. This is just another use of existing media type. I think that's what I'm saying.
Okay, I don't understand. I will have to get back to you, because that we looked at that a long time ago. I can't remember exactly what the differences were. We did find differences that made us develop a new one, or made us write this draft, but I can't give you the details right now.
All right.
Yep. So
I mean,
we can continue
if the syntax end up being different, then that's fine. I just, if just double check basically.
Yeah, we can continue this on the list, and there is another draft from Everett that is trying to do the same thing. So there needs to be some reconciliation there, but there's definitely a lot of interest in this particular capability.
Okay, Eric, I guess we will provisionally, take it to the list. We are concerned about the reproduction and the duplication and the competing documents. We'll have to resolve that and figure out what we're going to do. But
Sure.
There is interest in thinking this work is valid. So Eric, thank you. Please go on to your last one.
Okay. Move on to the last one. The last one is called content warnings. So this one has been worked on in collaboration with André Siddiq. And the motivation for this one was that when the RFC 7807 came out about problem details for HTTP APIs, that is a RFC that you can use to serve standardized error messages, which is very useful. It's used in many APIs nowadays. There was a clear need for that. And then the question was, can we do something about warnings, meaning that there is not an error, but some condition was not exactly as it should be? Is there a way how this could be exposed in APIs without having to reinvent that mechanism every single time? And what we did is we came up with a model where there's a header field called content warning, and that header field then signals that the request was successfully processed, but that there have been some warning conditions. And there are different ways how this can be signaled. The draft proposes that there will be a registry for registering different kind of content warnings. The draft itself only registers one, which is called embedded warning. And it also proposes a JSON structure that APIs then can use to actually embed the warning in the response. This looks like this. To show you a very brief example, so there's a post, and then the response says it's okay, but there are embedded warnings, and then in the content you see that there's this specific structure in here, and this structure is what is proposed in the draft. It's actually relatively similar to what RFC 7807 standardizes for the error messages, slightly different, but to give some similarities in the models, how that works. The history of this draft is we started working on it about a year ago, in November 2019. We have seen 3 draft versions so far. We have worked on making sure that we see some implementations. I think for this draft, definitely implementation status still needs to be tracked better. I'm not aware of that many implementations, but we do see some uptake, and that's the last draft that I wanted to present. And just as a summary, right, again, like I have a slide here where you can find all the information, but that's all that I had to present.
Any clarifying questions, comments? Wasn't clear to me that we had as strong a consensus for adoption here. So
Mark's got a hand.
Yeah.
So we discussed this and the precursors to it in the HTTP working group. And the first stage was just reusing warning, which we felt was a bad idea, and then he did the content warning proposal. But this is one of the things where I think having a separate working group is useful, because that community didn't have a lot of interest, but that doesn't mean it's necessarily a bad idea. It just wasn't interesting to folks in that community. My only question about this is, one of the considerations you'd make in this sort of thing when we adopt a header is whether it uses structured headers. And normally I think that's something we can talk out in the course of working on the draft, but because this one is saying, up front, this is a JSON format in a header, it's something, oh, it does use SF. I thought it was JSON. Martin says it's structured headers. Never mind. Okay, cool.
It uses JSON is the embedded warning, but the header field itself is actually defined as using the structured headers.
Oh, I see. Okay. I would support adoption in that I think that I can see the use cases for this, that people want to surface this information in headers where they don't have to crawl through the payload to find out what the errors were, especially for use cases like logging. If you want to do logging with your infrastructure like a CDN or Envoy or something, it's a lot easier to log a header than it is to log something from the body. And we do see some pressure on people to define new HTTP status codes because it's, they want something they can log. So I think that this would be an interesting thing to have, and I don't see how it could be harmful if it doesn't get adoption. It's just another header that doesn't get used.
But I think if I understand correctly, that you wouldn't actually log what's in the header. The header is just a signal to go look in the body, to go and say, oh, there is a warning in this body, and therefore you ignore all bodies that don't have a content warning header. But then if there is a content warning, then you go into the body to go looking for the warning. Am I right there?
Yeah, you could basically do statistics about, how many warnings do we get, like that kind of thing. But in order to really retrieve the full warning information, you would need to go into the body.
Right, but from what I saw in the example, there was an identifier for the warning in the header, which is what you'd grab onto. I mean, you can tell that there's a warning in the body just from the media type already. If you just wanted to know whether or not there was a warning there, there's a media type defined for problem details. So,
no, because this is for a successful response. This is where you aren't returning a failure. You're returning a 200, but there's warnings in there.
Okay, I need to go back and read the draft again. That sounds weird.
Chris has a hand.
Yeah, that gets in and around one of the questions that I had. So is the pictured usage of this exclusively for JSON documents? So would it be possible to have, it's not clear to me from reading at least what we have now, that the scope of this covers, if someone's returning XML, CBOR, MP5, whatever. That it would be usable to have this content warning as part of that, because there would be nowhere to necessarily to put the warning. Is that correct? Am I misreading it? HTML, yes.
I'm sorry, I dropped out again. I love my ISP.
So,
I'll... Did you catch my question?
No, I did not.
We'll have to take the discussion, I think, to the mailing list because we're already a little bit over time.
Okay.
Sorry for that.
I think the scoping on this is going to affect the desire for adoption.
Yeah. So I would say that we need some more discussion and scope it, like Chris was saying. We won't explicitly call for an adoption yet. Okay, so I think by all accounts, we've had a very successful first meeting. I'm going to end with thank you to Bron for taking notes, very extensive. I encourage people, I just posted the link there in the chat room. It's also in the agenda. Take a look, see if there's any corrections. You can post them to the list and so on. Thank you, Bron, appreciate it. And also your involvement in the Jabber room. Thanks to Daryl, the presenters. One last call for action, as our managers sometimes say, is go out and tell your colleagues that this group exists. and that you can just participate in the mailing list and the GitHub once that's set up, which we will announce in the mailing list. So thank you. I'll say enjoy the rest of the week, but that means enjoy the next session if you're going to any. And we'll see you online and hopefully in person soon.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
We're done. Yeah. Thank you.
Hey, Rich?
Yeah.
Do you want to maybe try and grab Daryl and chat about GitHub real quick?
Yeah, you know what? Let me message
I don't know what
you.
time it is there, so if that's
he
unkind.
and I were actually gonna chat. Can you do WebEx?
Sure.
All right, let me send you the link.
Cool. You know how to get in
Wow.
touch.
Yeah. Yeah, good point. Okay,
right.
let me yes.
All right. I'll see you
Okay.
next week.
Yep, great.